Not everyone knows where they stand on electronic shifting, but you know who does? People who've never used it. It's that whole fear of the unknown thing. But also, Eagle 12 speed, the most influential drivetrain of the century, is less than 4 years old, and SRAM is telling us there's something worth paying almost triple for. There's a lot to this, though, so we sat down at the bike shop and had a good long talk about it. So, where do you start when you're talking about Axis?
Where do you start when you talk about access? I think maybe price.
Yeah, I think that's where you start.
Because it's kind of the headliner, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the leading edge of technology, obviously, right? Wireless shifting, pretty cool. I mean, Mavic did it 20 years ago, but
Yeah. You ever ride one of those?
yeah,
Yeah. Did it work?
Mectronic, yeah, I
Yeah.
had a Mectronic bike.
Yeah.
It worked sometimes.
Yeah.
Other times not.
But that was over 20 years ago.
Yeah. So I mean, it's expensive stuff, right? Like it's $1,900 for XO1 full kit, which includes the entire drivetrain, right? They also sell parts individually, and you can buy like an upgrade kit, which just is a rear derailleur and a shifter. So you can get them in different ways. And obviously, the kit comes with a charger and a battery, like whatever you need to, keep going. And it's $1,000 for a derailleur and a shifter, which they call a controller, but whatever, it's a shifter. So $700 for a derailleur, and the little shifter buttons, $200. So pricey stuff.
It's funny how there's all these different ways to break down the price. Like when you're building the price of access into a whole bike, it's pretty reasonable. But like then you narrow it down, and I think the most important number when somebody is thinking about how much access is going to cost is that $700 derailleur.
Yeah, it's kind of like maintenance costs, right? Like hopefully you're not going to break that, but like it is a derailleur, and it's a pretty big one, by the way. And people break derailleurs, right? Like there are parts you can fix on it, whatever. But like you could bend it just like any other derailleur. You could smash it, and then your $700 replacement cost is pretty high, right? It's like European cars are really sweet too, but a lot of times people don't get them because they're more money to maintain, right? Like, and I think that's definitely something that is hard to swallow for some people with this stuff, right? And then the next question is it worth it, right? Like, is it that much better?
So I came at this from I've had a Di2 road bike for the past 7 or 8 years or so.
Yeah.
And I see high-end road bikes that don't have electronic shifting.
Yeah.
And I don't get it.
Yeah, you're like, why?
Yeah.
Why didn't you get that?
Yeah. Looking at price from a whole bike standpoint, it's just it's not enough more for price to at all be a factor, especially in a road setting where the act of riding is, at least for me, is relatively simple. I'm just going out and beating myself up for a few hours.
Yeah.
And it makes the whole experience just so much more pleasant. Like you're making a more direct connection from your brain to your experience.
Yeah.
It's so worth it.
It's nice, yeah, and it's funny, yeah, because you think about it as being a pretty small thing, right? But it's easier. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to like make that little pause while you're shifting and make sure that it makes the gear before you release the lever or something. It's just that extra level of precision. It makes the gear every time the same way.
And so this is where the leap from the road bike advantages to the mountain bike advantages gets me. There's a bit of a disconnect for me there, because road riding is such a simple act, and when you shift on a mountain bike, you're making weight shifts, you're picking lines and everything. That benefit of not having to think about where my arm and my wrist is was diluted a little bit because I'm already used to doing all this shit.
Like it's not that hard. It's not that hard to make a shift.
Yeah.
I personally think it's a pretty novel thing. It's not necessary, but I think it's really awesome.
On the trail, are there nameable benefits? Like, are you getting quicker shifts? Are you able to sneak more pedals in before shifts? Or
right. So for me, I think that what I'm feeling is the shifts are more repeatable. Like it makes the shift the same way every time, right? You can confuse it and miss shift, and if your shift, it's not it's not infallible. Like you can mess up, right? But it's less effort. You just hit the button and forget about it. You're like up, and it's gonna shift. But I don't feel like it's not worlds different in the actual shift quality or shift speed. There's a lot of shift speed, is relative to cadence anyway. So I don't think it makes it that much faster. And really, like, honestly, like, a lot of what I love about it is the fact that it's wireless, the fact that you don't have to string cables, and the fact that, like, you know, if you have a full axis setup with your dropper and your rear shifting, you have only brake lines on your bike. And I love a clean, uniform, simple cockpit setup, and that's a bigger benefit to me than probably it is for you.
Yeah, I feel like there's going to be two camps in this. I don't know. I feel like there's more kids in your camp than mine, but I think that what makes a bike, or anything for that matter, like ugly, is so arbitrary. We've decided that having fewer cables is prettier than having more cables. Like, but or that, like, you know, having, you know, a bike without bags and tubes strapped to it is nicer looking. You know, but we also bolt a water bottle and a chain and a shock and a bunch of links onto it, and like it's never going to look like some like modern Isomo Noguchi like coffee table, you know. I mean, it's
a bike. It's a toy. It's a piece of equipment, you know. And at the end of the day, like it matters how it rides more than how it looks.
Yeah.
But we invest so much money into these things, and they like become part of us. And people, you know, you have these, like, you get sentimental attachment to your bike, and that's special. Like, I mean, it doesn't technically matter, but it does, right? Because then sometimes it motivates you to go for a ride because you're like, oh, I miss my bike.
So speaking of cables, that's where I think there is an absolute benefit of electronic over mechanical, is that there's not that slow creep of friction into your cable that like you really have to be on top of, because it oftentimes it's not until you like reach over to a new bike and shift and you're like
whoa.
Yeah. So that you never have that problem.
Yeah, and that's very common. Like, as you know, both of us have been shop mechanics, and you know, one of the more common shifting problems, people come in, or my bike's not shifting right, and you're like, too much friction in your cable housing, right? Like, it needs to be replaced. When was the last time you did it? And it's one of those really common things that it's like as a mechanic, I'm thinking, I'm like, oh, there's shitty shifting out there all over the place, and people don't know it.
You can't put your finger on one reason why to go to AXS. There are plenty, but none are real slam dunks. And maybe we shouldn't expect them to be. Eagle 12-speed was a no-brainer, but that kind of technology comes around once a generation. Eagle AXS is a little more nuanced. There are trade-offs, though we haven't even talked about reverb access yet. Now, what about like unexpected consequences? Like, let's say you bash your derailleur on something.
Yeah.
I mean, for one thing, there's a cool feature in there that is like pretty instant. Of if you hit something, the motor essentially disengages and the derailleur can spring back.
Yeah, the derailleur, essentially the derailleur moves out of the way, and that's a nice thing. Like regular mechanical derailleurs sort of naturally do that in a way, because they're sprung, and then if you hit something, it just pushes the spring in. But since these are driven by motors, they're kind of locked in place until it shifts. So having that ability to sense an impact and move out of the way is definitely, you know, it will help save the derailleur in some occasions. Obviously, everything's breakable. And having a $700 derailleur hanging out there, sometime, you know, are you going to ride the same trails? Or are you going to be like, I don't know if I'm going to get into that trail today because it's a little bit tight and I've got a $700 derailleur on my bike, you know? Yeah, like I wonder if that's going to affect anybody's riding.
Yeah, like if you're looking at a crux little narrow thing, like is it going to be on your mind?
Yeah, like I don't have a $60, $70 GX derailleur. I have a you know, 7. And you're like, okay, well, yeah, maybe I'm going to get off and make sure that I don't F my bike up, you know?
And I mean, if the absolute worst happens, you kill your derailleur, like the experience is no different. Like you still can take the derailleur apart and single speed your way home or whatever. Like, so.
And there's mechanical portions of the AXS derailleurs that you can fix. Like the cages are replaceable. There are some parts for them that you can repair. Obviously, if you mess up the main body, like the parallelogram gets bent or tweaked or something, that's a replacement, and that's expensive. I think that like in a field service sort of way, like mechanical still has the advantage. Like it just feels like, to me, I feel more confident about, you know, being able to fix funky things. Like all the time, I'll be riding with people and their shifting's a little bit off, and I'm able to fix it for them, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that it's kind of unknown with the Access stuff, where you're like, okay, well, am I going to be able to fix something that's a little bit off, or it almost seems like it's working 100% or it's not working at all, and that's a little bit scary sometimes, right?
Yeah, there is a mode that you can get into really easily that is essentially like a barrel adjuster.
Yeah.
And you get these little tiny shifts, so the adjusting an axis derailleur is not a black box like
Right.
You might
It's
think.
simple. It's way more intuitive than it seems. The setup is easy. Like, bolting it on your bike and getting going. I mean, it can be faster than mechanical, for sure.
I mean, the bottom line is you shouldn't ever have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Because you don't have, like I said, you don't have this, 4-foot long variable between your shifter and your derailleur.
Exactly,
Like they are one.
Yeah.
So there's no friction, no compression or anything. And if something is a little bit off, chances are your hanger's bent, and you better take a closer look than just turning your barrel adjuster, because your derailleur's going to be in your spokes.
Yeah. And I think maybe some people are curious if you actually need to pair the Access stuff with your phone and have your phone around. But you don't. It operates completely independently. You can purchase it, set it up, and run it for an indefinite period of time. You don't actually need to connect it to your phone. You don't have to have it on the app. Like I ran the first few months I had Access, I didn't even pair it with the phone. I wasn't even running the app at all. So it works independently. The app does do a few things. You can update firmware and stuff like that if there's a firmware update for your derailleur or your shifter or whatever. But like I think if anybody has a question about if they need to operate back and forth with the phone, they don't.
What about unexpected little benefits? Like I was boxing up bikes for Bible, and it's really nice to box up an Access bike.
It is.
Just because, you don't have
It's
you don't have this extra cable floating around, especially if you have the Access dropper.
Yeah.
So that's a little mini benefit. And then, if you're putting it in a bike bag and you want to take the derailleur off, you don't have the cable messing the whole thing up. So
Another thing I like, working on bikes is with the dropper post. I can raise it in the bike or take it out and put a dummy post in to work on the bike. Or like if I'm building a fresh bike with a Access dropper, I can pair them while they're off and have a dummy post in there, instead of like having to worry about routing the cable and everything and stringing it through properly, so it's not, the cable's not being tugged and weird stuff. That's the dropper for me is really amazing. And we've been talking about shifting this whole time, but I'd rather forego the shifting than the dropper. Like if I had to choose one, I would definitely choose to have the dropper. I feel like it's amazing. It's actually faster than a normal post. And as far as like, all you got to do is touch that button and it activates, and it's instantaneous. For me, it has a much larger like performance benefit than what the shifting gives you. For me, the shifting is a little bit more novel, and the dropper is way more actual practical.
And you also don't have that factor of the fragile bits being, inches off the ground. So the durability concerns are just not as significant.
Yeah, exactly.
And as dropper posts, as our relationships to dropper posts have evolved, and speed is that much more important now. And slow, sluggish dropper posts just kind of
they're so infuriating.
Yeah. So because we've integrated using our dropper so much into the choices we make on a trail, that we want the responses to be super quick.
Yeah.
And so that's where the body motion or the wrist motion of pushing that in is kind of nice for it not to be part of the equation. Like you're just, again, getting that direct connection from your brain to your bike and your experience.
Yeah. And it's actually, on occasion, it's been too easy for me to hit that switch. Like I've hit it with my knees before, dropper post and shifting. And I've done it on the dropper post at times, a couple times, where it's actually been a little bit scary, where I'm like, like the seat comes up on me and I'm not ready for it. But it's like, it's just one of the sort of negatives that you just can't think of, and it's probably going to be hard to totally get rid of that in the future. Like maybe it's just something you have to get used to.
So speaking of getting used to the ergonomics of the shifters,
Yeah.
like I just have gotten so used to where a SRAM 1x shifter, where the paddles sit, that I was like, that's where my thumb is always going to want to be.
Yeah.
But what's nice with Axis is that your thumb really can sit in one place. Like you're always putting it to the same home.
Yeah.
It's just that or that.
Yeah, it can rock. It just rockers basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny to like actually toil over, you know, the difference in movement of like that versus that.
You know, it's just like any other technology-based convenience. Like we're so used to, like we've built our lives, like for years we built our lives around having answering machines at home, you know, and having payphones, and like and that became part of the way we communicate, and like having this delay between talking to people, and like, and now
Instant gratification, baby.
Yeah.
It's like that's what the 21st century is
yeah,
all about.
so
right?
like that came with some, you know, that came with some adjustment, but I think we're better off for it, and I think that's something that once you get used to what that just physical convenience of shifting and dropping your dropper electronically, like it just is one less thing to think about when you're riding your bike. So there you have it. Axis is unique in that its benefits are in how little you notice it, how it fades into your overall riding experience, and for that matter, into your bike itself. That's what good design's all about. It's invisible. And that's why it's so hard to know if it's worth the price until you spend some time with it. And by the time it's worked its magic, you'll have stopped noticing it. But again, that's the whole point.